Hi YouTube. I've got quite a few step-by-step painting tutorials now, so view my other videos to find those. This is just Horseshoe Bend in the Grand Canyon, and it's a reasonably simple watercolour. So if you're ready, I'll show you how to do it. Okay, this is stage one. Apologies for a slightly blurry photograph, but you're just trying to get the overall shape of the main rock in the middle, the sort of mound at the front, and just the edges of the main kind of cliffs in the background. Very straightforward, easy step, really just to get the overall proportions of everything in the right place. Okay, so for step two, I started breaking up the rocks more. Look for any kind of edges, corners, that kind of thing. And when you're happy with how it's going, then you start to darken your pencil lines. I then continue to do exactly the same thing on the other side. The rocks in the foreground, I slightly darkened the edge even more just to bring it forward in the picture. And then exactly the same thing for the mound at the front and the plant. With the plant, you just want to get all the branches kind of radiating around slightly to give that sort of texture. Okay, this stage is optional. All of the pencil shading that I do, you don't have to do. You could just leave it as an outline and go straight in with the paint. But I like to do it as a shaded pencil drawing first. I think it just adds a bit to the watercolor painting afterwards. So I'm trying to keep all my shading at an angle, which should kind of show the direction that the light is coming in from. So if you look at all my pencil lines on this, you can make out the main kind of angle that I'm going for. And I'll try and continue this throughout the whole picture. Okay, more shading in the background. It's really nice, this picture, because there are so many kind of angles in the cliffs in the background and things that are at the same sort of angle that I want my shading to be at. The light is obviously coming in from top left, so it is just going to kind of emphasize the fact that the light is coming in from that side. Same again to shade in the foreground. You're just trying to pick out the dark sides of all the rocks and like underneath the plant, and sort of emphasize any kind of underneath edges and that kind of thing. Okay, for the first couple of painting stages, I mixed up Payne's Grey as quite a thick pigment, and then I mixed up some raw sienna as well, which is a bit more watered down. So what you do here is you wet the sky first, just with water, and then you drop the Payne's Grey into it to form your cloud shapes. I tried to make them kind of sweep in from the left and the right, and that gives the clouds a sense of perspective and kind of leads the eye towards the middle of the picture. When you've got all your clouds in, you've got a chance to kind of play around with them a bit and move them around, as long as the sky is still wet. So that's why it's a good idea to keep the sky kind of really kind of soppy wet, because then you can use your brush, you can dry out your brush, and you can kind of lift bits of paint out of the sky or add more in. And yeah, like I say, as long as it's wet, you'll be able to kind of play with it and get it how you want it. And then you wait for your sky area to dry. Once it's dry, you just basically fill anything that is a rock with the raw sienna colour. So it's just a flat wash over everything. This just kills the white. Okay, then I used a mix of raw sienna and English red. And with this, what you do, you can do flat areas in some places. So you can see the bits at the back here, those are flat areas. And then what you're trying to do is go along the edges of the cliffs. So you put like a dark stripe into an edge, and then you blend upwards from that edge to soften it in. And you're trying to leave each highlight edge as pale as you can to give the effect of the light hitting it. And you just work your way all the way around. And then continue the same on the other side. Dark into all the edges and blending away from the dark edges. And then obviously the rocks that are more in the foreground, you can do a dark stripe underneath some of the rocks, and then this time you're blending downwards. Okay, and then just a little bit more on the mountains in the background and on the mound in the foreground. Okay, for the plants and bushes, I used a mix of yellow green and cadmium yellow to give this very kind of limey looking green. And I put that in just as a flat wash into all the kind of plants and bushes. And then I let that dry, and then I used turquoise blue just as a flat wash into all the areas that are water. But then while that's wet, what I did was use a bit of kitchen paper just to dab out some pale highlights to make it look like the light is catching the water in a few places. And I also dropped some more of the yellowy green colour into the water while it was still wet, just to give a bit of a wet in wet effect here and there. And I also dropped in just a little bit of Payne's grey into some of the shadowy corners and things. Okay, so although we had used a mix of English red and raw sienna to put some darker tones on, they're not enough to look shadowy. So to make shadow colours, a lot of people make the mistake of not putting on colours that are shadowy. You need to have either blues in your shadows or blacks or purples, that sort of thing, to make it look shadowy. So in this example here, I've used English red mixed with violet. Don't use violet on its own because it's too strong, but mixed with the English red, it neutralizes it a bit. And then essentially what I've done is go back into all of those edges that we did before, but this time you make your stripe a little bit thinner, and you blend away from the stripes in exactly the same way that you did before, but you're not blending quite so far, and that gives you the dark, and then the medium, which was the colour we used before, and then the highlight, which was the first pale wash that we put on. Obviously there are certain areas that you can just put a flat wash into, like those spaces at the back again, and also these larger areas of flat colour of the shadows in the middle rock. Okay, if this looks like a totally different painting, it's because it is. I taught this as two separate Zoom classes where I did the same image twice. So it doesn't matter, I'm at the same stage in this painting, so you'll be able to follow on from here. So this is just me going back in and adding a little bit more dark into the water, just to darken some of the blues a little bit at this stage. Okay, now it's all about contrast basically. So our mix that we did of violet and English red, you can go back, you can add more pigment to that, potentially just a little bit more violet compared to the English red, and then you're just going back into corners and edges and just strengthening it compared to the last image. And I started adding some of the kind of horizontal striping, you know, the sort of bands on all of the cliff faces, and you can add extra lines that are going to kind of give it texture and things at this point as well. Okay, I continued with the same colour in this image as well, with the violet and English red mix. I added things like shadows to the bottoms of the cliffs on the left hand side, a bit more strengthening into corners, that sort of thing. You can also slightly water down that colour, and you can use it to blend edges and things just to round them off. So if anything's looking really, really sharp, you can go in and just soften it just a little bit. I added things like extra shadows that kind of sweep like underneath some of the rocks and underneath the plant in the foreground, that sort of thing. And once all of that is dry, you can use English red on its own, and you can see basically anything in this image that looks really kind of reddish brown colour, I've gone back over and added some flat washes in, or I've gone into an edge and then I've blended away from the edge, like blended upwards. Like if you look at that really strong bit of English red in the foreground on the right hand side, I put that against the edge of the rocks and then I blended it upwards into what was there already. Okay, and you can add little hints of this. You can always water it down quite a bit and add hints of English red wherever you want. And then I did things like little shadows to all the trees, the little tiny trees right in the distance. And I think that really kind of helps as well. Okay, I almost finished the painting at the last stage, and I thought about it, and I decided actually to add some more hints of colours. So I went back in with a bit more English red, watered down, and also a bit of raw sienna watered down. Okay, so normally in a watercolour painting you work light to dark, and the very darkest colours that you see are the ones that you put on right at the very end. But actually there's no reason why you shouldn't get to the sort of end stage, but then say to yourself, well, I quite fancy putting just a few hints of lighter colours back into it, which is what I did here. So if you compare the two, you'll see that it's just a little bit more colourful than the last image, just because the raw sienna and the English red just add a certain amount of strength to the overall colour. Okay, and this is how I decided to leave it. It's always difficult to know when to finish a painting, but because I was doing this with my Zoom classes, we basically did 2 hours during the Zoom class on the drawing stage, and then we did another 2 hours on the painting stage, and then I finished it as well after that. Probably took me another couple of hours after that as well. But you could keep going on this forever, really. You could keep adding more and more detail until it looked as much like the photograph as possible. But sometimes I don't want to spend so long doing a painting, and actually, I've got quite a lot of paintings that I've done that are looser like this that I end up preferring, or not preferring, but I like just as much as paintings that have taken me, a month or something, or a couple of months to do. It just depends what you're after, really. Sometimes you don't want to spend loads and loads of time doing a painting, and sometimes it's quite nice to do a loose painting like this in between doing a painting that you spent months and months on. And sometimes you're just trying to get an overall impression of the subject matter, and it's not as important to get every single little tiny detail. Okay, I'll leave you with this little satisfying run through of all the stages. If you've enjoyed this video, please check out my other videos on YouTube. There's a step-by-step one on how to paint a thatched cottage, for example. There's things like a beetle and a seahorse, various different things. Please hit subscribe if you want to see any more videos that I post up in the future.